building a venture-backed business is really like entering the business Olympics. You're literally saying, I want to create a multi-billion-dollar company. There aren't that many of those that get to exist in the world. And so what you're saying is, of all the people in the world who are working in some business capacity, I want to be on the podium.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava, and you are listening to episode 181 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors, and operators to unpack their journey, lessons, and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. The voice that you heard a little bit earlier was that of our guest for this episode, James Tynan. James is a partner at Squarepeg Capital, one of the largest venture capital funds in Australia. In 2022, they raised a $860 million fund, taking their total to $2.4 billion across all of their funds. Prior to his role at Squarepeg, he co-founded his first startup in his first year of uni called Tiny Green Gorilla that he bootstrapped for 8 years before it was eventually acquired in 2008. He was also an early team member and eventually the VP of Strategy and Operations at Kahn Academy, which was the world's largest edtech startup at that time. In this episode, we covered a range of topics, including how James and his wife make important life decisions by their moleskinning process, the key ingredients that made Kahn Academy so successful, why investors need to overcome their own fear, the importance of operating in your zone of genius, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with James Tynan. Hi, James. Welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast. Thank you for hosting us in your beautiful offices in Sydney.
Oh, thanks for coming. It's good to have you guys here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this episode for a while, so great to have you on. But James, for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Sure, yeah, thanks. Well, the short story on me is I was a founder in Australia in the early 2000s. Most people who were here at that time know that there wasn't much of a tech ecosystem at all. So I bootstrapped a business for about 7 years before selling it, getting what we now call a minor exit and going around the world and being very bitter about Australia not having a tech ecosystem. Ended up going to the US via McKinsey & Company for a few years. Got very lucky in Silicon Valley. I joined a YouTube channel that wanted to build an edtech, and we ended up building the world's largest edtech at the time, which is called Kahn Academy. And so that was a classic rocket ship ride and to over 100 million users and a lot of crazy stories. Came back actually to renew my visa in 2017, having lost touch with the ecosystem. Bumped into a bunch of the founders here and felt like with Canva and Culture Amp and a couple of other folks who I met, what's happening? You know, this whole ecosystem is exploding. And so, and I'd be lying if I didn't mention that we had a 2-year-old at the time and both sets of grandparents were in Sydney. And so we packed up and came back to Australia, and I took over StartMate for 2 years and fell in love with investing, came to Squarepeg 4 years ago, and that's where I am now. Yeah,
amazing. Incredible journey, all of which we'll dive into. But obviously, you know, as you're summarizing, there's so many different parts of your story that you casually brushed over. But, you know, maybe starting at the starting point, so even with your first business, I believe that was in your first year of uni that you
Yes.
launched that, which, you know, as you mentioned, is a very different sort of ecosystem and landscape back then, but also not a very sort of common or popular thing to do as well. What kind of led you to starting your first startup at that time?
Yeah, it was a really weird thing to do at the time. There wasn't the kind of what there is today, which is just all of the media, and you couldn't go online and go to Y Combinator and understand all of the different things that you read Paul Graham's posts and understand what you're meant to be doing. So we were doing everything wrong. But what, you know, your question was why do it? I think I was always really attracted to the idea of changing things at scale, kind of being able to have an outsized impact. I was just a nerd at school. You know, I was building websites and Flash. I don't know if that dates me pretty hectically, but Flash and building, you know, little games and just being a nerd. And so that attracted me to what was happening in Silicon Valley at the time. You know, I was tracking a bunch of different companies and technologies. And so I just really wanted to do it here. And yeah, I guess that's what kind of launched the idea for the business.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I remember when I first got started in the startup scene. First of all, I grew up in Canberra, so didn't really have anyone around that was into the same sort of thing. But I remember when I moved to Sydney after uni and just meeting a couple of people that were into the space and finally feeling like I belonged because there were other people that were like me. But as you mentioned, there weren't a ton of resources. Even starting this podcast 7.5 years ago, I still had to explain to people what a podcast was, and now, almost every second person has their own show, or a lot of people consume content. But, what did that, again, journey look like in trying to figure that out when you were so young and didn't have that sort of resource and information?
Yeah, it was a lot of trial and error. Essentially, at uni, I was studying law and filmmaking, strangely enough. And so I was exposed to a lot of digital kind of video, digital photography type technology. And that became part of the business. The business was really in digital archiving for kind of private schools. And because that was a market that I knew because I come out of a private school, and then the technology side of it, I was able to learn and come up to speed. I think the bit that was the most missing at that time was really understanding business models and what the implications of that for your scalability as a business. And so what we built was something that was quite, in some ways, highly profitable. It became, it blew up in the first, almost immediately, and we had to stop uni and go back eventually and go back part-time. But it was not a business model that was capable of kind of hyperscale, and it had higher marginal costs than it needed to. And so as a result, it wasn't a technology. It didn't become the kind of great technology business that I think I wanted to scale, but I just didn't really know anything about that.
I'm curious whether I totally agree, because I had a similar issue with my first company as well, of just not really understanding business models. And, I think there's definitely the benefit of having a ton of resources is that you don't have to repeat a lot of the same mistakes. But I guess one of the other things that kind of come with that is you get given a lot of advice, or there's almost a formula to do things that doesn't really get questioned because that's what everyone tells you that you should do, and you don't really have the opportunity to kind of learn that as well. I guess, were there any other lessons that you took away from that may not have been as obvious to you if you hadn't had to figure that out on your own?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so many. I do agree. I think that the lessons that you learn from some kind of suffering way more important than the ones that you just get told. I don't even really believe that when you're told something, you learn it. I think that you have to almost stub your toe against the metaphorical bedpost in order to really learn it on some deeper level. For me, it was really around the necessity to have hard conversations. I was working with one of my best friends. We had a bunch of different employees who were also friends. And I think that at the time, neither of us were particularly good at having, more confrontational conversations. And so we let a lot of things slide, and I think that caused more suffering than it needed to. And so, we're still really good friends. And in fact, it didn't really cause suffering between the two of us, but it was something that I've always thought about since is having hard conversations early is always the way to go.
Yeah. And those hard conversations and just even a lot of those lessons can be so obvious in hindsight. So even you mentioned that you joined, rocket ship Kahn Academy at that time, but I to my understanding, when you joined them, it was still relatively early days. Like, they were growing quite quickly. I think you were employee number 20 or so.
In the 20s. No, so Sal had taken some funding from, I think, Bill Gates and from Google, and so he'd raised a bunch of money. The videos had been very successful on YouTube, and he just hired a small product team and they were working on releasing the first Kahn Academy product to the world, the first tech product to the world, and that's right when I joined.
Yeah, but I guess to complicate matters even further, when you're looking at something relatively new and unsure, is that you also got given an opportunity to join Stanford.
Oh yeah, no, that's very true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did it? I spoke to your wife, Kate. Did she mention that it happened on the same day? Those both offers came in, or at a very similar?
It was, I don't actually know if it was the same day, but it was a very similar time. She probably told you that I was paralyzed for quite some time. No, the thing was that the Stanford process was one where you put your application in quite in advance, and then once you find out whether or not you get in, you've actually got quite a bit of time to work out whether or not you're going to say yes. And what happened was that I put in the application. I'm pretty sure I started working at Kahn Academy, and I got word that I was accepted, pretty early on in the piece. But by the time it was time for me to really, it was obviously super exciting, and I knew something was amazing in the work that I was doing day to day. But by the time the kind of whatever it was, 3 or 6 months had expired and I really had to give them an answer, it was just so clear to me that I was on a rocket ship, and that I was literally hiring MBAs from, the top tier unis in the US onto my team. And I was like, and they were desperate to get the experience that I was already having. And I was like, well, maybe this is the right decision, is to stay. But it did, because Stanford had always been part of my dream. I didn't mention that in my overview, but definitely, going there had always been a big part of the way that I visualized being in the US.
Yeah. And that must be really hard when you do have this like long held dream of something that you wanted to do, and it's right there in front of you, and all you have to say is yes. But then given another opportunity, I think a lot of people would just go with it because it's safer. It's something they've wanted to do for a long time, something probably most other people would understand a lot more as well.
Yeah.
Again, what was that, I guess, again, in hindsight, right thing, easy to do. What was that process like for you?
That's such a good question. I think that a bunch of the moments in my career have been ones, and life generally have been around grasping at some crumbs of self-knowledge and trying to pull them together. And I think that actually the Stanford process was really useful for that, because it forces you to write these essays about who you are and what you're about. And I'd never really done that. And I think actually in doing that, I realized that what I was about was really about having these big impactful changes wherever I could, and learning. And so when I would then, and there was a bunch of people involved. I spoke to folks who'd been and folks who were currently there. And as I got more of a picture of what life there would look like, and particularly what life afterward would look like, with a lot of student debt and probably having to go back to McKinsey earlier to work that off, versus being able to stay on this rocket ship. And it became clear that what I was really about was better served by staying at Kahn Academy.
Yeah. Kate, who's also a superstar, also told me about a process that you both have called moleskinning.
Yeah. This is really funny. So that process is something we've done, I think, ever since we were together, because we've always had these, you have these big life decisions, big life moments, and we'd often do it for each other. So it would be one of us would have a big decision to make, and the other would say, okay, cool, let's sit down. It was, you get those little beautiful little moleskin notebooks and write out what are the factors that really you're solving for. So it might be, are you solving for family? Are you solving for career? Are you solving for what are the things that you're really trying to solve for? And then across the other side of the matrix, what are the different options that you have? And then it's really just a matter of, okay, for option A, say Stanford, how would you score? How is it going to affect these various different things you're solving for? And then for option B, say Kahn Academy, how would that affect? And then the important part of the process is that you weight the factors that you're solving for. They're not all even, right? If family is really important, then that needs to be more highly weighted. If your career is more important, then that needs to be more highly weighted. But when you then sum those numbers and you look at how the different options stack up, you're often quite blown away by how your rhetoric doesn't match, the actual scores that you see. And that's certainly been the case with the Stanford decision. I think I was entirely paralyzed. I didn't feel like I had enough of a handle on it. But in subsequent decisions, I think I've noticed when we've done this moleskinning process that, hey, I'm talking a big game about how family is really important to me, but the kind of decision that the future that I'm trying to push myself toward is one where it only spikes on career and nothing else. And so how important is it really? Am I living up to my words in that way? It becomes really obvious to you when you do this moleskinning process.
Yeah. We caught up for coffee recently and we're talking about a lot of these sort of things. And I think it is, I think this industry in particular obviously invites a lot of people who are like very driven and ambitious and all of those sort of things. And I think that a lot of the time that is really important. But as you said, if you
think that you're doing it for family and all the things, a lot of that gets pushed aside. And a lot of the time we go, some later point in time when I've got this and this and this kind of worked out, that's when that will happen. But as you said, it doesn't really align with what is actually really important for you, and that sort of comes to a head at some point.
I know it is tricky. I'm torn on it, because on the one hand, I do believe that building a venture-backed business is really like entering the business Olympics. You're literally saying, I want to create a multi-billion-dollar company. There aren't that many of those that get to exist in the world or get to that scale every year. And so what you're saying is, of all the people in the world who are working in some business capacity, I want to be on the podium, you know, and that is a really incredible statement. And it requires, if you're really going to medal in the business Olympics, I think you need to be prepared to give it your all. You need to be prepared to train like an Olympian. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you should be driving for burnout. I think that's actually a problem. I think you need to be really smart about it. But your kind of jogging pace, you need to be like Kipchoge. You know, your jogging pace needs to be other people's sprinting pace. So I do think on the one hand, if you're going toward this venture-backed startup route, you really do need to be incredibly dedicated to that, and that other things will probably take a backseat in some ways. On the other hand, I'm not sure that that's entirely healthy for someone's entire life. There have to be seasons to things, and to exist in this world, and to thrive, I think we need real connections. And that is one of the problems I see with a lot of the world that we live in, is that folks can get pretty disconnected in a world where they don't feel like they can be 100% honest with their employees, because, oh my God, they might freak out if they know I'm freaking out. They can't be 100% honest with their investors for the same reason. And then they're working all the time. And all their friends have just become Instagram friends rather than, you know, real friends. And I think it can be very isolating. So I think both of those things are true, and I'm not sure I've fully got them reconciled. Yeah,
I think it's probably, to your point, I think it's probably important to understand what you're in it for and why you're doing it. So like you said, you know, in a sense, everyone wants to be on the podium at the Olympics, but do you want to wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning every single day for the next 3 or 4 years to do that, and everything that comes with that, all the sacrifices and those sort of things? And so I think just like understanding, is this even the thing that you want, that you're going after, versus the expectation, or, you know, doing it for other people, or how it will make you feel about yourself.
Could not agree more. I mean, this is one of the things that I have wondered about is whether or not humans have different energy systems. And this might become, I sound a little woo-woo. I don't mean it to be that way. I just mean that there are certain, that you can get a lot of drive, right, from having, you know, feel competitive with other people, or having a horrible fear of failure. The latter is the one that I've experienced. You can get a lot of energy from, you know, these kind of, I guess, dirty burning fuels, which give you a lot of drive, but also can hurt you in the long term. I also think it's possible, and perhaps the aspiration should be, to get the same amount of drive and energy, but from renewable fuels, which are things like, you know, genuine curiosity, a real attachment and understanding and thrill of your particular content area that you're particularly fired up about. The team that you're working with, and how you thrive off interacting with them. So I think that there are these different forms of energy or fuel that you can use. And perhaps the challenge is how to minimize the dirty burning fuel and maximize the renewables.
Yeah. And I think to your point, like, it looks different for everyone as well. I was speaking to one of our portfolio founders from Playbook Ventures, and he is like the typical Olympian in that way. He's totally wired for it. He's got his family set up in such a way that he can still have his own version of what that balance looks like for him, but is under no qualms that this is what I choose to do, and there are trade-offs, and it's unfortunate, but he's very comfortable and wouldn't have it any other way. Versus, I think there's the kind of counterbalance of, you know, again, all of the media and just exposure and, you know, all of the good things that get said about businesses and people that go after a particular type of business, which, as you said, is only really for a small subsegment of companies and probably for a small subsegment of people as well.
I completely agree. I think that's right. We're constantly reading about venture and amazing tech companies. The ones that dominate are this very small group, and actually there is enormous success to be had in other forms of other events. Like, you don't need to play in this one single event. And yes, it is where I spend my time, which is trying to find these Olympian founders who want to play in the venture event. But yeah, I think there's plenty of room for like amazing success, which is potentially not as destructive to other parts of your life.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about an important issue that I see prop up time and time again in my conversations with startups, as well as companies that I'm investing in via Playbook Ventures. And that's how difficult, time-consuming, and expensive it is to get your ISO 27001 and SOC 2 compliance. These certifications are important in building credibility and trust with large enterprise customers, but can be such a big distraction and operational drain for early-stage startups. Thankfully, there's a tool to help with this. Vanta helps companies get and stay compliant by automating up to 90% of the workflow for the most in-demand compliance frameworks. And with over 300 integrations, you can easily monitor and secure the tools that your business relies on. There are over 6,000 fast-growing companies that use Vanta every day to manage their risk and prove their security in real time. To find out more by watching their 3-minute demo video or to speak to a local team member, head over to vanta.com/playbook. That's VANTA.com/playbook. All right, let's get back to this episode.
Speaking of success and going back to Kahn Academy, what was it about it that you think made it work so well? Because obviously, at the time it felt like there were so many competitors and just so many people in general over the last couple of years that have tried to do similar things. What was it about Kahn Academy and the founder in particular that you think made that the success that it was?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is great because it's an Australian audience, so people may not know this story as much, but I really do think it comes down to who Sal is as a founder. The story of Kahn Academy is funny because it started organically with him coaching his, I think, niece Nadia in mathematics. She was really, really bright, but failing math. And so he starts coaching her. And then word gets around his extended family that free coaching is going on. And so all of the cousins and nieces and nephews come out of the woodwork, and suddenly Sal's coaching like a whole bunch of different family members. And so organically he starts making these videos and putting them on YouTube so that for his family members, for his kind of younger nieces and nephews. And what that did was it defined an entire tone and vibe of what Kahn Academy is and what learning could be. Because I think a lot of us think about mathematics in particular, and we think of sitting in rows in a classroom, looking at with a teacher kind of writing kind of arcane signals on the board and being like, oh, what is actually going on here? And instead, what Kahn Academy presented was this vision of what learning could be, which is, no, what if you just had, this incredible kind of avuncular figure just sitting down next to you and being like so confident that you're smart enough to get this, and just infinitely patient and just sitting there going, oh, hey, here you go, here's how it works. And that vision of learning is one I think that captivated people, because we've become so used to what's called the Prussian model of education, which is the kind of factory model where we kind of farm kids into the same age group into a bunch of classrooms and kind of farm them through a bunch of subjects with either, half of them incredibly bored because it's going too slow and half of them terrified because it's going too fast. We're so used to that this new model, I think, really set the world, or at least the US, on fire with what it could be.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful framing. If I think about, if I was to teach my friends' kids or like nieces or nephews or those sort of things, like the way that you would think about doing that, and as you said, like the patience and the care that you would have would probably be very different to if you said, just go and teach someone how to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Sal also has other assets, which is he's an autodidact. He is someone who teaches himself everything. And so he's not, and this is true of a lot of great founders, he is not comfortable to just repeat the line that people say to pretend that they know a particular subject. He will dig and dig and dig until he understands something from first principles. And what that means is he can be a great teacher. And that, I think, is something that the best founders have in common, is that they will dig until they really understand something. And once they understand it from first principles, they can transmit that knowledge to others. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I'm often looking for too.
I imagine one of the challenges of that really innate ability that he had in the type of content and the voice is a really great starting point when you're doing it just for your family. When you're trying to scale that and do that, and you're trying to do it with something that's venture backed and has to grow really quickly, things can break and things can lose focus. What does that look like in trying to scale that sort of
same focus for Kahn Academy? Well, I guess we had a bunch of advantages and a bunch of disadvantages. One of the advantages was, while we were funded by a bunch of people who were in the technology venture space, we weren't officially venture. So Kahn Academy was backed by, folks like John and Ann Dorr from Kleiner Perkins, by Eric Schmidt from Google, Bill Gates and others. But it was done like OpenAI's early days. It was done under a kind of not-for-profit model, but exactly the same pressures, applied. So what you're talking about is very true. I mean, there are so many things, but one of them, I think, that really struck us hard was that while the initial vision of what education could be caught fire, there was also a natural backlash among teachers and the people who are in the current education system. And they saw this guy, Sal, who was MIT and Harvard and, been in a hedge fund, this kind of technologist, coming in to put them out of a job. And they were not cool with it. And so it was one of the things that I was keen to do, relatively early on in my tenure at Kahn Academy, was to build us a brand platform and a movement that was inclusive of educators, which of course everyone at Kahn Academy wanted to do. This was not my thing. The vision of Kahn Academy was all about embracing teachers, but somehow just seeing this particular avatar of Sal was one that we needed to move past and be able to embrace everyone in that journey. So that was one of the things that we needed to tackle later in the process.
And I imagine that's something probably a lot of founders of companies, especially working with more traditional industries, would face, especially if they get the sort of level of success and traction that Kahn Academy does. What does that look like in trying to be more inclusive and bring people along versus it being something that the industry is actively trying to fight against?
Yeah, honestly, it's funny. I think it's different for each company. And I would say that some founders are going to be combative with it, and some founders are going to be more inclusive. Ultimately, I think it's going to depend on the dynamics of each industry. I'm thinking about, one of the companies. I just had lunch with the founder of Nero, which is a company that we backed a few years ago. And they are building this incredible technology that allows, massive infrastructure players like energy utilities to see exactly where all of their infrastructure is, and actually run physical simulations on it. What is so interesting about Nero is that their technology actually allows a distribution network, like an energy network, to double its capacity just with software. So I think this should be on the front page of every day. Like, the paper that is kind of saying, hey, we can't shut down this coal-powered plant, or, we're worried about blackouts or whatever it is, we're worried about our energy future. We literally have this amazing tool at our disposal, and we're not using it. And so to your point, like, how do we get around that? I think the way that these guys are doing it is they are just chipping away. Every day they're getting another customer and another use case. And in Australia, at least, I think they were at 70 or 80% market share. So they're at a point where all of the big utilities are using them now. And my hope is that now that we can see a picture of pretty much all of Australia's energy infrastructure, we can start to make optimizations across the entire landscape as opposed to just within one network, and that'll be very powerful. But doing that requires bringing other stakeholders in. So it's their journey is one where it's going to require government, it's going to require regulators, and lots of players working together to really get what I think of as these kind of transformative benefits. Having said that, they're doing great even without that. So yeah, they're being much more inclusive than I think some others who would be more combative, like Uber have been in the past.
Yeah. And obviously, as you mentioned, sort of Kahn Academy was an absolute rocket ship. I think particularly during sort of 2014, 15, the height of its powers.
Yeah.
What did that decision look like for you to leave Kahn Academy?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was funny. It was like, I felt like there were a bunch of us there at the time who were really fired up to build Kahn Academy into this, really huge thing. And then as time changed, as we actually achieved a bunch of what we wanted to achieve, you start looking for what else life might have. And for me, I felt like we solved a bunch of the problems around how could we get into classrooms or how should we talk to teachers and all of this kind of thing. And we'd launched a bunch of products. And so I guess my mind just started to be open to, I'd been there, 4.5, heading toward 5 years. And my mind started to be open to, well, do I want to, is edtech and education going to be my entire career, or am I going to start to look for other things? And I think that's the danger that we were talking about at coffee, was you can get a little bit too enmeshed, especially when you're on one of these rocket ship companies. Your identity can get a bit mixed up with it. And I think that had really happened for me. And so I found myself thinking, well, do I even have any value outside of this company? I've obviously done big things here and I've had incredible experiences, but I don't know whether I can, deliver value for other people. And so it really took me a little while of looking around, having a bunch of conversations with people, and then having that really weird experience where I came back to Australia for a visa and bumping into people like Cliff from Canva and Didier from Culture Amp and a bunch of other folks, and just being like, wow, this is exciting. There's something else that's pulling me. I was suddenly instantly curious, and it was pulling me in another direction. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had Daniel Petrie on the podcast recently, and one of the things that he mentioned was when he first left Microsoft, and he was, one of the 5 senior VPs under Bill Gates, and one of the few people in the world, let alone Australia, to get to that level. And then when he left, well, he said up until that point, his phone's always ringing, people are always trying to get in touch with him, all of those things. And then as soon as he left, the phone stopped ringing.
Yeah.
And it's a very weird feeling to go through, and also, trying to navigate in terms of what next is really hard. And I think especially for you, as you mentioned, when you came back to Australia and didn't necessarily have the relationships and networks and all those sort of things as a starting point, and again, I think this is something that maybe not necessarily just founders, just people that have maybe had a career path change or have been let go from their workplace and are trying to figure out what's next. What, again, if you don't mind sharing, what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, it was similar in a way. It's funny, I had a chat with Daniel at an event one time about Bill Gates, because I also had some great run-ins with him via Kahn Academy, and so we were comparing notes, but we didn't compare notes on this. And I think it is quite confronting. Well, I think that's the first thing to get through, is what even am I outside of this organization? And for me, the process was one of having conversations with other startups in the US. I still didn't think that I was coming back to Australia. I was just looking for my next thing and solving problems with and for them. And I think that that one thing for folks to think about is what lane you're in. So I think in this kind of technology startup space that I think a lot of your audience are in, you're either in a founder lane, you're in a kind of known operator lane, like a CMO, head of sales, product manager, that kind of, obviously software developer, engineer. You're either in an established kind of operator lane, or you're a generalist. And by generalist, I mean the type of business athlete who can take on almost anything and take it from 0 to 1. And I'm definitely the latter. Right, I'm this, or before I was an investor, that's really what I was. I was someone who would just take on anything and get it from 0 to 1, and that is a tricky place to be when you're transitioning, because if you're a front end software engineer, then you can go for a lot of front end software engineer jobs. If you're a business athlete, you can go for anything, and there's nothing to really narrow it down. And also, you're not exactly who they're looking for a lot of those more established positions. And so I guess what I would say is, for folks out there who fit into that role, the thing that you need to realize is, one, it's a real thing, and startups need those types of employees. But two, you will have to apply the same entrepreneurial talent that you would apply on the job to getting the job. So it's about having lots of conversations. It's about problem solving and surfacing problems with founders or with whoever it is who you might be working for, and trying to understand what do they need, and is that something that you could take on, and almost like finding and creating your job. I think with StartMate, for instance, I was StartMate's first CEO. It was one of the things that I talked to Nikki and Nick Crocker about. It was like, hey, maybe we could put StartMate on its own. It had been this, I guess, side project of one of the Blackbird founders, had always taken it on, and once a year they'd taken a bunch of people to the US, and that had been a great thing, actually predating Blackbird. But I think talking to Nick in particular, it was like, hey, what if this was its own thing? What would it look like if we could build StartMate on its own 2 feet? It could have its own funding. It could be a self-sustaining thing. That was applying that same kind of entrepreneurial talent to building a job that didn't really exist before then. So that was an example.
Yeah, and what does that look like as well for accelerator programs? I had a conversation with someone a little while ago about just accelerators in general. And, StartMate is the absolute gold standard in Australia. But it seems that it's just a very tough business model to get right and sustain, especially in a market like Australia, but even maybe on a global level, like Y Combinator and stuff aside, like what's your perspective?
No, I was super naive. Which is also probably a theme that will come up in this conversation. But I was super naive. I think I said, oh, well, we'll put StartMate on its own 2 feet. It'll have its own team. We'll probably launch other products, and it'll become this self-sustaining thing, its own brand, etc. And I mean, credit to the Blackbird folks, which StartMate was their baby. They were kind of like, yes, okay, we do want to do that. But I think none of us realized how hard it was, especially for StartMate, because while it had been running for years, as I said, it predated Blackbird, none of the value generated by StartMate was coming back to StartMate, the entity. So the kind of carry that StartMate was entitled to was being parceled out to the individuals who were contributing as part of a given cohort. And in fact, when I joined, like at least half of the funds that kind of startups would get from their investment from StartMate was actually coming from Blackbird, because StartMate wasn't raising enough money of its own to even support the small amount of investment that it was making in its cohorts, which, if you know anything about how venture funds are funded, is a problem, right? When you're not raising very much in terms of funds, that means that's nothing in terms of fees. Yep. And then the carry is also not coming back to StartMate. It means, wow, it hadn't had any of the value coming back to help it support itself in its history. And so that was one of the things that we fixed. We made sure that a bunch of the carry was coming back to StartMate, that the funds that we were raising, actually, Grok and Skip and a couple of other angels in the network were really great here. We, modeled the amount of funds that would kind of come to StartMate, and that helped with the fee structure. And then the main thing that we did was we launched the StartMate Fellowship, which was applying the magic of the StartMate network to people's careers, as opposed to just the founder side of things. So, it's great to support founders, and of course StartMate will always, I assume, do that. Obviously not my call anymore, but that's core to the idea. But being able to then expand to supporting people to come into the world of startups as an operator, as their job, as opposed to as a founder, was something that we could do with no additional capex spend, not much in the way of, operating spend either, and really start to give StartMate another lease on life.
Yeah. Was StartMate your kind of first opportunity to really invest in companies? Obviously, you'd been run your own company that you bootstrapped and built for 8 years. You obviously built up and saw Kahn Academy from the very early stages. But was that the first time that you got an opportunity to really lean in and support founders at scale?
Yeah, it was. And so many learnings there. I mean, I still think that I owe Nicky in particular a debt of gratitude, because there was some really useful lessons I learned from him, and also from a lot of the kind of mentors at StartMate and the founders. I mean, it was one of those things where I came back with, as you said, zero network. I didn't know anybody. And suddenly I had this really amazing group of people who I could call on, and it just felt completely different to be part of the ecosystem. So no, it was a huge thing for me, a huge learning curve.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, a lot of lessons from investing in kind of early stage companies. I guess what are some of the lessons that you took from that you're then now able to apply through your lens with SquarePeg?
One of them, which was very intuitive to me straight away, but I kept having to mention to StartMate mentors, was when we're selecting companies to join the cohort, try not to focus on, everyone wanted to focus on the companies that they felt they could help the most. And that's great. But at the end of the day, really what you're looking for in a founder, I think, is someone who you're learning from. So don't get it twisted. I think a lot of folks in the venture community like to think of themselves, or who are investing in startups, as on this kind of elevated level, because they're the ones investing in the founder. And what I would constantly have to remind folks is there are no levels here. If anything, we work for the founder. And so don't think of it as you're imparting money and knowledge, to this poor founder. Think about looking for and selecting the people who you would be thrilled to be able to spend time with and learn from. And I think that was one of the big lessons of StartMate for me.
Yeah, it's again, I'll reference the interview again, but one of the things that Daniel Petrie, was when they invested in Canva, is like, there's nothing we can do to help Canva. And obviously a lot of funds and investors think about what's the value add that we can bring here, and how do we take the business from X to X. But everyone talks about you're backing the best founders who understand their industry and their market better than anyone else. And so more than anything, you're there to support them, and in a lot of senses get out of the way and let them do their thing.
I think that's right. I think that bad investors can really hurt a company more than good investors can help a company. But I do think that there are things that great investors can do for their founders. And I think at SquarePeg, it's very cultural. I think it's part of it is we structure our funds. While our funds are like large in the region, we don't take that many bets per fund. So we only have a smaller number of founders per fund, which means we can spend more time with those founders and actually more dollars, over the course of their journey. And that can be critical. There are times in a company's life where catalyzing around is make or break, and being able to be there and support, not just with time but with money, is really, really important. I think the other thing that can be really useful is being able to be a founder's wide angle lens on the world. They are so heads down in their business, in what they're building day to day, that being able to have constant conversations with other folks in their industry all over the world. We're in Australia, we're in New Zealand, we're in Southeast Asia, we're in Tel Aviv, we're often in the US. So being able to bring all of those relationships together in service of a founder, I think can be really useful. But I think Daniel's right. At the end of the day, it comes down to the founders are going to be successful if based on their own abilities and efforts, and the market and luck, more so than what the VCs do.
Yeah, I do want to come back to that piece, but I think it's worth noting even your decision to join SquarePeg. So I only mention this because you've been pretty public about it, but you suffered from autoimmune issues, which led to you leaving StartMate. And again, I think you mentioned when you joined StartMate, you didn't really have any sort of networks at that time. I think StartMate's an incredible way to accelerate that, and I'm sure you would have had multiple opportunities, parts different things that you could have done. Why VC, and why specifically VC with SquarePeg?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, you're right. I got really ill. And what happened was my available energy dropped to almost zero. And it was right when we were launching the fellowship, and it was those were some tough times. But after we got through launching the fellowship and getting things on an even keel, I was just so low on energy that I only wanted to do things that gave me energy back. And so I found myself just gravitating to just working with founders and all of the operational side of things. And I just didn't have time or energy for. And so part of me was thinking, in the back of my mind was thinking, oh, well, how can I just do this full time? This is all I really want to do. And I honestly did not plan to look around. I planned to just help out with StartMate and just work with founders for a while. But what happened was that as we transitioned Michael into the CEO role, of course, people came out of the woodwork, right? Because you're right, StartMate is a really great network in that way. And so there are a few international funds, and I think I'd spoken at a SquarePeg LP event. And so I think that we ended up in a conversation with SquarePeg, and this what I gravitated to was these guys were they just thought about venture in a very collaborative way. Venture can be really cutthroat, sharp elbows, and that kind of thing. And I really loved the idea of a culture that was, as I said, it was really about concentrating your support and making some hard decisions early so that you can really be there in a tangible way. And so I loved that. And I also, having worked and lived overseas, I loved the idea of a fund that wasn't just, occasionally meeting folks from overseas. It was like, no, we have offices overseas. We are spending a big chunk of our time either boots on the ground or spending time on both coasts of the US. And of course, I've got friends there, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to keep those contacts up. I'm actually so it's having that in the DNA of the organization, that it was about bringing the best of the globe to Aussie founders was really important to me. And so yeah, despite my plans to more rest and just help out, I ended up kind of joining this team, and yeah, it was a really, really great fit.
Yeah. Well, one of the other people that I spoke to as part of the research process for this interview was Jethro, who you work with quite closely. He did mention that I think he first met you through his second interview with SquarePeg, and he said he was incredibly intimidated to talk to you, but also he said in a very positive way, one of your best qualities is asking very pointed questions. And so one thing that he mentioned that has stuck out to him since that first time meeting you was what you asked him during the interview process.
I have no memory of it. I think I remember I was like trying to buy a house or something, and poor Jethro had flown up and was in the office, and I was like on Zoom, like rushing to try. I think that was one of our interviews.
Well, one of the things that he mentioned was, obviously he was working different at that time, and was I guess like relatively young, but has been in really good and senior sort of operator roles, and had a team of 40 underneath him, and was obviously applying for a team at SquarePeg, which I think you were very direct in pointing out, like, why do you want this? Again, do you want to elaborate on, I guess, almost the importance of being very direct with a lot of these things? You mentioned that as a learning from your first company as well, around those sort of things, but yeah, do you want to share a little bit about why that approach was important specifically in that case?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're probably seeing there is I'm just trying to get to the core of, for someone like Jethro who could go in a lot of different directions, is this core to what he wants to do and who he wants to be going forward, or is it's one of many cool things that he might want to do? I mean, we just talked about my transition to becoming an investor was one that it was almost one of discovery for me, of working out really deeply, what am I about? What do I really want? And when you take away a lot of what makes me, or what I thought of, which was like all of that, the energy to kind of take things from 0 to 1 and be a builder and do all this stuff. When you take all that away, what do I still really want to do? And so I think I'd been through that myself. And I think that's what I was then quizzing him on, was like, is this a mission that he's on? Is this something he really, really wants? And I do find that getting to the core of those types of questions earlier helps remove a lot of suffering later, because it'll come out one way or another, right? And with Jethro, this is absolutely what he's meant to be doing. So it was a great win. But I think that was probably what I was trying to do.
Yeah, and I think it's similar to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, of almost this expectation that you have to be a founder and you have to raise money and all those sort of things. In a very similar way, like being a founder now is sexy, and you have the opportunity to make life-changing money and to be in the media and all of those sort of things. Similarly with VC, there's a lot of power associated with that, especially in our industry. And so it can attract really smart people for the wrong reasons.
Yes. Yeah. No, exactly. I think that's, as I was saying, and maybe this is a bit of a theme, I think for a lot of my career, I was just chasing bright, shiny objects and really things that I was genuinely interested in, but I'm not sure that I really was self-aware enough to work out what my zone of genius is. And I'm not sure where this framework comes from, but it's the idea that you've got your zone of incompetence, which is things you do worse than other folks. You've got your zone of competence, and then excellence, which is things that you do better than most folks, but they still take a lot of effort from you. And your zone of genius are things that you can do better than most folks, but feels effortless. Like it feels like it gives you energy back. And one of the things that is, I think, very true of smart people in any capitalist economy is the economy will do a really good job of shepherding you toward your zone of excellence, because the economy wants to get as much juice out of its smart brains as it can. And so I'm often in this conversation with really smart folks who are trying to work out what to do next. And I'll say often that, you will definitely get opportunities that are in your zone of excellence, because people want to get that kind of economic value out of you, but no one can help you. Only you can work out how to make the transition from your zone of excellence to your zone of genius, because the market economy doesn't care how much it hurts you to get that value out of you or how much you enjoy it. It just cares that it gets the value. So you're the only one who can really do that inward inventory to be like, no, where am I getting this? Where am I getting energy back? And what does feel easier to me? And that self-reflection is something that I think is so powerful if you can get it right.
What would you say is your zone of genius?
I think working with founders. I just love it. I think I can have back-to-back Zooms all day. And so long as they're good founder conversations, I'm energized. If they're not, then that's maybe not so much. But no, working with founders is something I don't need to second guess myself on.
Yeah.
Do I need to spend more or less time on this? It's always good.
Yeah. It's actually something Jethro mentioned as well, which is, and we've been on this as well, whenever we're doing meetings on Playbook Ventures side of things and you have a call with the founder, I think sometimes you can tell very quickly that it's not quite going to be the right fit. Mm-hmm. And something Jethro mentioned is it can be very easy to take your foot off the pedal or get disengaged. Mm-hmm. But one thing he's really noticed about you is that you tend to lean in even more and try and help companies, which is not necessarily a natural thing. And again, if it's not necessarily an area of passion or your zone of genius, it's very easy to let that slide. That's
the StartMate kind of DNA. I think when I first came into StartMate, I was just running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, trying to set up all the operations and make it work really well. And I think I got this feedback. We do this. It's now called House Party, but we used to call it office hours. It was you'd set up a whole bunch of back-to-back meetings and with a bunch of mentors, and you just let anyone book them. And so you'd end up with a couple of days worth of just back-to-back meetings with founders, and then feedback goes both ways. So you get feedback on the founders, but you also get feedback on the mentors. Fantastic thing to do. And I was looking at my feedback, and it was all, James comes in, you better buckle up because James is going to come in like a hurricane. He's going to tear your idea apart. He's going to tear you apart. But it'll be really helpful, but it'll be like really intense. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, is that, I wondered, is that really, where's that coming from? Mm. And I think ultimately it was coming from probably like a little bit of insecurity that I felt like I needed to quickly grab control of the conversation and dive toward an area of a problem area and dig in and try and solve it. And I think I've now calmed down a bit with that, and I'm now able to just be there for founders in a way that lets problems emerge more organically and let them do perhaps more of the job of guiding where things need to go. And I think that informs what I'm doing today. It's yeah, I mean, what Jethro is saying is also when we know that we're not going to invest, what should happen next? And my thought on that is always, well, you still help, because you help however you can. And money's only one way to help. And so, again, it's probably that start made DNA.
As you may have seen on this podcast many times before, I'm a really big believer in surrounding yourself with the right people. And that's why I'm delighted to partner with Sender. Sender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're anything like me and busy running your startups, you don't always have the time to do your own books and forecasts. And instead, you can fully outsource your finance function to give you the time, energy, and resources back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. Sender has a dedicated focus on founders, funders, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. That's SCENDAR.com. All right, let's get back to this episode.
Someone else that I spoke to was George from Val, who was your first investment, I believe, from SquarePeg. He also mentioned that sort of really one of your superpowers is really harsh and realistic feedback. Again, in a very positive sense. And I think it's funny you mentioned that sort of mentoring story. I remember when I used to do startup weekends way back like 11, 12 years ago, when I was first getting started in the startup scene, and they would have like a mentor of the weekend thing. And I remember there was one person who used to win a couple of them. And one of the other mentors mentioned to me, oh, it's super easy. You just say really nice things to founders and like never push back on them at all, and they'll think you're wonderful. But actually the most important thing, I think for a founder is for someone to be a mirror to you, to hold you to account in a really positive way, but also like point out things that, again, we as founders, you want to present the best picture possible to investors and to your team and all of those sort of things. Like when you know that everything's on fire, and anyone who's been anywhere near a company knows everything is on fire all the time. And so, one of the things that George mentioned, and he's also mentioned that there's a particular way that you do about it. So he mentioned there was one issue in particular that you'd brought up in several board meetings and they knew what you were going to bring up every time, but you also went about and looked at different ways that they might be able to overcome that issue. But again, do you want to talk a little bit about that sort of structure? Yeah,
sure. I mean, I think I've reflected a lot about this, because I think there have been times where I've been on the right side of the line and times where I've been on the wrong side of the line. But I think all of it comes from how much does the founder trust you? And with that trust, they'll expose more of the business to you and more of themselves, and then you can help more. But if you're a jerk, and if you're just, bad feedback or non-constructive feedback for the sake of it, that's really going to erode that trust. So it is a bit of a push-pull. I think what I've realized is that the motivations matter. And what I mean by that is, if you're giving hard feedback because you, the investor, are afraid, or you feel like you're being judged by your other partners because this investment isn't going very well, or all of which we've seen, right? Like with other investors that we're on boards with, I think that's what really bad investor behavior comes from, is their fear, or our fear, and fear of being judged, or that kind of thing. So if your feedback is coming from that selfish place, then it doesn't really even matter how harsh or nice it is. It's not useful. So the game is, I think, or the object is to calm your own fear and to be okay with what's going on, and to be in service of the thing that you and the founder are aligned on, which is just be in service of the business, be an instrument for the business, And then it's possible, I think, to be, pretty direct, because ultimately this isn't about Rohit's doing a bad job, Rohit's a bad person. It's let's both look at this third thing and let's work out how to optimize that. It's we're playing the ball, not the person. And so with George, I think there've been times that I've been a little bit too guided by fear. There's been like, it's an amazing company, but it's also such a big swing, right? Like it's my first investment, and so I'm a little bit too tied into it. So I think I probably have erred on that side, but I think mostly we really trust each other, and so we're able to talk like that.
Yeah, and speaking of fear, it's, as you mentioned, it was your first investment into the fund. Also, a very different investment to what SquarePeg normally makes, which I think would have made things significantly more difficult and introduce a lot of fear from your perspective. But even like, how do you get something like that across the line for a fund like for SquarePeg that obviously has been around for quite a long time and has a very sort of particular, from an outside perspective, has a very particular kind of investment style? Yeah,
listen, I would say that SquarePeg is more thematic than some of the other folks. I think we can be thematic because we're looking at opportunities from across the world. And so, we tend to look at SaaS and AI and fintech and a little bit of climate, a little bit of health tech. And so I think that's true. One of the things that has been true of SquarePeg from the jump is that the partnership will take bets on big emerging frontier areas, but they're often not at the core of the fund. And so, I mean, you look at with Q Control, I think got to be Australia's leading quantum company in terms of what they've been able to achieve, their revenue, etc. Incredible company. SquarePeg was there very early. Vow, another example, actually one that I can't talk about, but we're literally hopefully in the throes of finalizing, is another kind of real frontier business in AI. And so it is something that SquarePeg does, but did I feel out on a limb being the guy coming in and defining this new idea around, what are we going to be able to do with cellular agriculture in the future? Yes, definitely. But I would say that what helped me, and I think maybe this is one of the reasons why venture can be really tricky, is because often you've got these smart people who are all very judgy and they're judging each other and they're judging businesses. I think inside the SquarePeg investment team and the partnership, it genuinely is very supportive. So it's, okay, we made this decision, we all made it together. And whether or not whoever was on whatever side of the vote, we all just commit. And I think that is just core to the culture. And what that means is, for a new investor coming into SquarePeg, it was only really my own insecurity I was dealing with. I wasn't dealing with any judgment from other people. And that is an incredible gift that you can give someone in a job like this, is to say, we've got your back. And this was all of us doing this. Even though, yes, it was you leading the deal, this is all of our decision. And that's such a gift.
Again, I think from a founder perspective, I feel like there's still a real sort of lack of knowledge and understanding of behind the scenes what happens inside a VC fund. And I think this is a really interesting example of why picking not just the fund, but the right partner at a fund is really important as well, because potentially if they'd gone to another partner, it may not have had the same level of interest or buy-in around those sort of things. Inside SquarePeg, do you have, again, any advice for founders in terms of how they not just pick the fund, but pick the right partner and the way about going and how to go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my advice is really boring. It's do the basics really well. And that involves working out how to tell your story really well, doing your research on who the investors who you really want, and then getting a really large funnel. It is, at the end of the day, a numbers game, and you really do want to have a top of funnel that means that when a bunch of those conversations don't convert, that you still end up with a bunch of conversations that are converting. And so sometimes I feel like I don't know, maybe I'm not giving the right advice, but it's simple but incredibly hard, if that makes sense. Like, it's a very hard thing to be a founder and be fundraising, but the kind of intricacy, it's not that intricate. It's kind of like, yes, do your research, build your funnel, learn from every single conversation, improve your storytelling using the feedback from every single conversation, and just, keep going. I'm not sure what else to say. It's really tricky.
Well, I guess in that sort of specific example, where maybe they're not as familiar with all of the partners that are at a fund, to just understand that particular partner is the right partner for us to go through, versus if we were to go through another channel, we might get a no. We've at least got a higher chance around that. Any way that founders can discover some of those sort of things. So I know, for example, you do a little bit of writing in different areas of interest, but I guess, is there any other way for founders to surface those things, to just understand what the right channel?
Totally. Listen, every fund is different. That's the other thing to remember. And so with us, and we have a relatively small team, like there are other funds out there, particularly I think the US funds, that have a tier of relatively junior associates. And sometimes, and I really feel for founders here, where it's like they feel like they're getting these junior burgers, taking up their time, kicking the tires, etc. That's not the way that Square Peg works. Anyone you speak to from Square Peg can lead an investment. So with us anyway, don't worry about that. But with others, you may need to get past the mini boss in order to get to the kind of end boss. When you come to meeting with partners, it should be relatively straightforward to find the investments they've done before. And unless you're working with a really new partner who will probably by definition be more interested anyway because they're hungry, then you should be able to work out where in their realm of interest your idea fits or doesn't. So I would use that. Of course, all of their writings, their podcast appearances. And it shouldn't, in this day and age, it shouldn't be too hard to find out where you fit versus this type of stuff they've been thinking about.
What are you interested in?
Yeah, a lot.
We'll open up those can of worms for anyone listening and doing their own DD before meeting with you.
Sure. Yeah. You can look at my investing track record. I am interested in a lot, but I think I spend most of my time on AI and SaaS companies, climate companies, and some kind of health tech. Particularly, I need to be careful with health tech, because what I don't mean is medical devices. I mean SaaS AI companies that happen to touch health. And so that's where I spend most of my time.
Amazing. Mindful of your time, and there's a ton of things that I have notes on that we could talk for hours about. But maybe final thing to cover with you is, one other thing that George mentioned was that one thing that really stood out to him in his time with you is just your intuition for marketing and storytelling is unlike any other investor that he's come across. And I know we had a conversation about just the importance of storytelling for founders as a whole. But again, everyone can tell you to do it properly and do it better. What does that process, from your perspective, really look like in founders really honing their story?
Well, I'll steal a line from my wife who does comms and marketing work, and say that founders should treat their story like a product. So it's something, thinking through your brand and how you tell your story to investors, how you tell your story to customers. It should be something that you treat like a product. And in that, there should be strategy, there should be early releases, and then there should be consolidation as you consolidate your learnings. One kind of example of this, it would be, so many examples, but I was talking to a founder recently who was actually working through a bunch of pre-launch product decisions. And we were talking about how to make those decisions. And I thought, and we started talking about it. I was like, I think really we need to do some kind of very basic positioning work. And he said, oh, like marketing, really? I said, yes, but it's not really marketing. It's strategy. It's saying, who is this for? What market is it in? And how is it special? And those kinds of things, they're not really marketing questions at the end of the day. They're just core strategy questions. And so I think that for a lot of startups, attacking, there are lots of, all roads lead to Rome. There are lots of ways in to attack some of these questions. And I think probably the most neglected road is the one that you call product marketing. And I think there's enormous advantages to thinking it through.
Yeah. I had Alex Zatarain from one of the co-founders of 8 Sleep.
I listened to that podcast
recently. Yeah. And one of the things that we spoke about was how they branded from a smart mattress company into a sleep fitness company, and what that meant in terms of their marketing, which was if you were to look at it as a core perspective of sleep fitness, is you're not going to be doing everything optimally every single day.
Yep.
It should fit into your lifestyle. And so that's important because it gives you a guiding light. And I guess similar to what you and Kate do with your moleskinning and all of these sort of things, it gives you, if you know what's important, it gives you a framework to understand how to say yes or no to things, versus if you don't have that,
absolutely,
it's a little bit hard to steer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really, I mean, ultimately, and this is the, to go back to the obligatory tech bro quote from Sapiens, everything we think in stories. And so being able to tell a story internally to your product team of this is what we're about, this is what's special about us, helps everyone independently make decisions that then all consolidate and help push the entire business forward. And of course, those stories are different to your investors and they're different to your customers, but they all share the same core. And so working out what that core is and having multiple ways in to attack it is incredibly important.
Yeah, amazing. James, as I mentioned, really appreciate your time. I know we've gone way over what we scheduled, but absolutely enjoyed this conversation, and just want to say thank you for everything, obviously, that you've shared in this podcast, but also speaking to a lot of the founders and people around you. I think the support that you give founders is invaluable. So that's embarrassing, but
but no, thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here, and it's really great to get to hang out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming on. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to episode 181 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.